The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning. This is Melinda Dade from Texas Education Agency, and I'm the Interim Information Security Officer here. And today we're going to talk about cybersecurity tips and tools, virtual meeting security considerations. I wanted to let everyone know that everyone has been muted for this call. A recording of the webinar will be posted next week on the Texas Gateway. And you can find it at that link on the screen and look for the cybersecurity tips and tools icon. And then it will bring you right to the webinar. Also, a time will be allotted towards the end of this presentation for question and answers. So feel free to put some questions in the GoToWebinar platform, and then we will address a few before we finish up today. So in response to the COVID-19 pandemic that a lot of the local education agencies have had, we've had to transition from providing education in the traditional brick and mortar to moving to a digital instruction. So today we're going to discuss some tools that are available to conduct these virtual meetings or classrooms that we need to now hold, and how you can secure your meetings from uninvited guests with that might have malicious intent. And the graphic here, you might have seen it in the news. There is a term called Zoom bombing, and I'll get to that in a few minutes, but that's the reason for the graphic right there. And before we go into this and really delve into the different virtual tools that we can use, I did just want to put out the framework and the expectation that all software at some point or another is going to have vulnerabilities or security exposures. So it's important upon us to just make sure that we do our research to look into these different tools and use the proper precautions to protect our end users by using best practices and best configurations for those. And then at the end of the day, it is up to each individual LEA to make their decision on what tool they need to use based on their level of comfort with security with the tool and just their understanding and of the research of those tools. So today, as I mentioned different products, I'm not endorsing any specific product. I just want to present to you some different things to look out for overall, but then also we'll dive into a little bit of the details of some of the popular virtual meeting tools, and I'll give you some configuration guidance for those if that's one of the tools you choose to use. Here we have a list of some of the pretty popular virtual meeting platforms. I'm sure that many of you are using these in your schools. While I am here, I did want to bring particular attention to Zoom there at the top. That one has received quite a bit of media attention in the last month, and I know for some of you it might be confusing to hear all the different reports, and I'm hoping that we're going to be able to clarify some of that today so that we can walk away understanding what the risk is that we're accepting and how we can mitigate that risk. So I wanted to just take a few minutes right now to just address those items that have been in the media and just explain some, how that's being taken care of moving forward. So one of the main things that Zoom has been in the news for is something called Zoom bombing. And what that is basically there's been malicious actors that are somehow getting access to the meeting IDs and dropping into the meeting calls and posting graphic or offensive content. They're basically just trying to disrupt the meeting and in some ways embarrassing the host or embarrassing the other participants. So a lot of those are access issues, and those are going to be able to be mitigated by a lot of the configurations that we're going to talk about today, and also Zoom has worked on modifying their software to make it easier for the users to manage those access considerations. Also, another one that was discussed was their documentation not quite matching what consumers would expect as far as end-to-end encryption. And primarily the issue comes into play with dial-in of participants that are dialing in using their phone. Those currently, up until this point, were not encrypted. But all users that are using a Zoom application, using the Zoom link, they have their chats and their video encrypted from one user to the other in end-to-end. And the Zoom employees are not having access to those calls. So one of the things that you can do to mitigate that is you can, if you are doing something that's very sensitive in nature, is that you can only require that folks use the Zoom app itself and that there's no dial-in for those meetings. That is something that Zoom is working on at this time to provide a solution for that. And a couple others was they were reported to be routing their calls to China, even for non-China users, and that caused an alarm for some of the consumers. And what had happened at that time was that they were just receiving an influx of users using Zoom, and so they had to move. They chose to move and open up their servers in China to help ease that throughput flow for their Zoom users. But they are working on trying to make sure that they are as secure and private as they can. So I do believe that was one of the ones that they mitigated and moved off that to find another solution for. And then last but not least, there was a recent report as early as this week discussing there were 500,000 Zoom accounts that are up for sale on what's the dark web or a hacker community website. And I did want to speak a little bit to that because it's not necessarily that there was a breach at Zoom. The way that it was confirmed to be getting those credentials is through something called credential stuffing. And what that is when you have usernames and passwords that have been collected from another breach, from a different application or a different website, and then hackers use those credentials because sometimes people reuse their passwords, and I'm sure that's none of us, but sometimes they reuse their credentials, and so these hackers will just try those different combinations in Zoom until they have a successful login. And then from there, they can get the meeting IDs and things like that. So one thing to keep in mind with that as far as mitigating that is, for one, you can take your domain and you can find, there's different services out there where you can look for to see if anyone on your domain has been up on a dark web or a hacker site and that email account is for sale. That's one way. And then for those users, you could let them know if you reuse your passwords, please go and update your passwords so that they're different, even on Zoom. So those are the main news articles that I'm aware of with regard to Zoom, and I just wanted to take a few minutes to just give you the baseline of what's been out in the news and then how it's being addressed, just to help ease some uncertainty there. So I want to go through some generic different steps that can be taken for all of your different teleconferencing software that you're using. That would be best practice just to keep your classrooms and keep your meetings as safe as possible and as private as possible. And then I will go into a few of specifics with those different tools that I just mentioned above. So one of the first few things is it's not recommended to make your meetings or your classrooms public. Make sure that they are private. Do not share a link to one of those meetings on an unrestricted, publicly available site or social media page. You want to provide that invitation directly to the specific people that you would like in the meeting. Adding a password to the meeting is another way that helps make it to be private. You're going to want to manage your screen sharing options, especially I'm sure the teachers will want to look into this as if there isn't a need for there to be screen sharing, then it's best to just turn it off for all the participants. Obviously, that may change depending on the purpose of using that virtual meeting. And then it's recommended to use a wait room to manage participants. So if they're joining prior to the host or rejoining after the meeting has already started, they'll come into a waiting room, and then from there someone would validate the participant list and allow them into the meeting. If you're going to choose this option, it's really recommended to have a co-host for your meeting so that the host can focus on their presentation, and there could be a co-host that is validating those participants into the meeting. You're also going to want to limit who can join meetings as a presenter and only enable specific individuals to help co-host the meeting. You want to keep in mind the data security and compliance that your organizations need to comply to. I know for a lot of us with the schools, we need to comply with Ferpa. So researching the different tools we're using and just making sure that those tools have Ferpa considerations in mind. You'll also want to disable file sharing if possible, if it's not needed for, if it's not a necessity for that meeting. And if you must share files, do note that the Microsoft Cloud Storage service is fully Ferpa compliant. Some of the other tools on there may also be, but you'll need to do your research to double check on that. And then you want to mute your participants who do not need to speak, especially as the meeting comes up. You may want to just select the option to mute your participants upon entry. And then do not record a meeting unless it's necessary for the purpose of that meeting, and be aware of others that may be able to record the meeting. A lot of these different virtual meeting platforms will alert the other users that someone is recording the meeting. So people just need to pay attention to that. I do know that Texas is a one-party consent state. However, I think it would be professional and a courtesy to let all your users know that you are indeed recording the meeting for users. And before sharing your screen, you'll want to close unused windows to ensure you do not have sensitive, potentially you might have sensitive data in the background. So just make sure to close all your windows. And then use a privacy shield or cover over your webcam when it's not in use. That's just more than just virtual meetings, but there are some ways that, you know, if your computer was compromised, those are different tools that hackers could use. So covering that is always a great idea. Ensure users are using the updated version of remote access and meeting applications. Especially in this last month, a lot of the tools have been bringing out updates every few days even. So it's really important to make sure your users are getting the most updated version. A lot of the updates are security related at this time because it's such a big thing in the news. And lastly, ensure your organization's telework policies or guide and address requirements for physical and information security, especially since a lot of folks are in the home. We just need to make sure that if they have any printed documents, that they are also securing those in a compliant way as well. So I'm going to move into speaking specifically to the different virtual meeting applications that I had on that list earlier. And we're going to start with Zoom. This one has caused the most attention in the last month, so we're going to make sure we cover this one as best we can. For those of you that have a managed Zoom account for your school district or organization, where you have an actual admin that's administrating it for all the other users, I'm going to walk through some of those settings that you're going to want to look at. And then I'll also review a few that if there's some of you that are just individually using it and it's not fully managed by your administrators, what steps you can take. So if you're a Zoom administrator, you should ask all users and their guests to enter their full name as well as their ESC or district abbreviation. So that way, when they're in the Zoom meeting, it'll be easier for folks to validate them into the waiting room. You should also force all users to use passwords for scheduled and instant meetings. And there's several password settings in the administrative console, and it's suggested that you turn them all on and lock them. And the way that you can lock those settings is through the admin, account management, account settings. To hard set those settings, you can make sure to click on the padlock icon to lock the setting for everyone. And then you're also going to want to force your users to use a waiting room. And this can be found under admin, account management, account settings, same place as the other one. And also here you can hard set it with the padlock icon and lock the setting for all. You're also, like I mentioned earlier, going to want to recommend that your host assign someone to moderate meeting room so that if there's folks that shouldn't be let in, that they're not. And then you'll want to disable and lock the far end camera control, and that's under admin, account management, account settings, and it's under the in-meeting advanced. And then Zoom administrators can disable join before host for all and lock that setting as well. That allows the host to be the first one in the meeting and then allow those in the waiting room to make it into the meeting. And then you can lock screen sharing down to where it's just the host that can share, and that's something that's recommended. Also, just in the case of, since we'll have some students, potentially high school students, or just anyone that wants to be a little bit funny, the virtual backgrounds is a feature in Zoom, and you can import any picture that you want in there. So if it becomes an issue with people putting virtual backgrounds that are inappropriate, you have a couple options. One is that you can actually turn off the video camera of any of your participants. So if there is someone that becomes inappropriate, you can always just turn off their video camera. If it gets really bad, you can always just dismiss one of those people and they are then locked out of the meeting. You can do that by clicking on the participants list and then clicking on the attendee. But you can also go into the meeting settings and you can decide as a host to allow or disallow the virtual backgrounds. So that is a setting that's available in Zoom if that becomes an issue for you. And here is what it will look like to an individual user in Zoom when they go in to schedule a meeting. You're going to want to always be using the meeting ID that is generated automatically, and it is highly recommended to always then have a password. It's you can put your own password there, but it will also always automatically generate a new password for you. That meeting ID and that password will remain the same for that particular meeting. So if it's a rescheduled, if it's a reoccurring meeting, it will have that same meeting ID and password. but it's always recommended to use those options for your meetings. And then also at the bottom, there's an advanced options that shows where you can mute participants upon entry. You can also choose to enable waiting room in those options as well. And then this is one of the responses to all the attention that Zoom received. They actually put in a security toolbar icon within their within the actual meeting. If you're currently using the Zoom application and you do not see this toolbar at the bottom, just make sure to update your software to the latest version, and you should be able to see this at the bottom. This is where you can allow participants to share their screen, chat with each other. I would recommend that you turn those features off, that you do not allow that, and also that you do not allow them to rename themselves. This is also where you can choose to enable a waiting room or lock the meeting. And when you lock the meeting, that any participant that falls off and tries to come back in will not be able to make it back in, or if anyone that wasn't invited to the meeting comes in, they will be locked out. So enabling the waiting room, this would allow people to wait into a waiting room, and then they would have to be validated before entered into the meeting. So I'm going to move into some of the and briefly talk about some of the other tools that we use, and just mention a few things that we can do to make sure that they are configured securely. So in Teams and Skype, you can use chat pinning tool to ensure you are chatting with the correct participants, and understand that chat, channel, and files data are retained forever unless the system administrator has modified that retention policy. So if you are a system administrator, make sure to look into what your policies are with your organization, and then make that accordingly. On reoccurring meetings, always check to ensure one-time attendees are not included in subsequent meetings or meeting chat threads. And then do not list personal information such as location, phone number, or date of birth on your Skype profile. And I have a link down here below. DIR provided an excellent resource for helping with some of these virtual meeting configurations and best practices. Webex is one that some folks use. You're going to want to schedule unlisted meetings and hide specific details, such as if it's a host, topic, and starting time. Do not allow attendees to join before host, and set up a meeting to require all attendees to enter a password. Create a unique password comprised of upper, lowercase numbers, and special characters for each meeting. That would probably be good for all the ones that have passwords. And then exclude the meeting password from attendee email invitations and provide the password to attendees via separate email or by phone. And then GoToMeeting, use the attendee list pane to view all meeting attendees and change their presenter rights or revoke attendee privileges if necessary. And when sharing content, select Show Only to share the desired information from the computer. This selection will show an animated gray frame indicating what attendees will see if you select it. And then require attendees who join via telephone to enter their audio PIN. And this gives the organizers audio controls over that participant. And if you see that a user did not enter their audio PIN, you can right-click the person's name and select Send Audio PIN so that they'll be able to enter that in. And I didn't want to go into super detail on Adobe Connect, Blackboard, or Google Meet, but I did want to provide you with a link to each of those that has a list of security tips and configuration resources to help you better understand how those platforms are being secured while you're using them. And I have some additional resources regarding securing virtual meetings. The very first link is Zoom's privacy policy that is specifically written for K through 12 schools that are using their education license. And in there, they address issues with Ferpa and other privacy considerations for children. And the second one is the best practices for securing your virtual classroom using Zoom. So they have a dedicated site that goes into a few more detail and explains some of the different scenarios potentially in a classroom. I've covered most of those configurations and considerations broadly in this presentation, but you may want to use that as an additional resource. And then the third bullet here is a Ferpa and virtual learning during COVID-19. It is a webinar, and this is a link, I believe, to the PDF version of that webinar. But it had excellent content on how to address moving to a virtual learning environment and also adhering to Ferpa standards. And it has a lot of frequently asked questions. So it's a great document to review. You can go through it and look for the particular questions that may apply to you. And then the last one is a K through 12 remote learning checklist. And it's a checklist of cybersecurity and safety protections. So just different thought processes of, the different things that you want to be aware of and thinking through as you are implementing your remote learning environment for your students and your teachers. And then here's some community resources at Texas Education Agency. We do have a page on our site that's specifically dedicated to, issues that are heightened during this COVID-19 pandemic and situation. We do have a section under there that is labeled as information technology. And I will also be posting this presentation there as well. And we also add frequently asked questions there as well. The Texas Department of Information Resources, they also have a page on their site that is specifically helping to cover some issues with moving to a remote learning environment and remote working environment. So a great resource. And they'll also be publishing and posting new content as things move on. I do know that they are planning for a webinar on April 22nd, and information for that should be on their site. They're going to be, after the webinar, they're going to be posting that to their site, and it will be covering different cybersecurity issues that we may be facing or may have been heightened during this current time. And then the Consortium of School Networking, they also have some documentation that helps just give you some broad topics of things to consider regarding cybersecurity and working remotely and how to handle, different things that are specifically related for K through 12. And then this is not related to the virtual learning, but I do know that for many of you at the school districts, we've seen many questions come in regarding House Bill 3834, and DIR has as well. This is a bill that is, DIR is responsible for implementing this with all the local and state government. However, in the past we have been helpful to try to let you guys know what the status is of this bill. So for any questions or updates, please use this website to, that's where they're posting all their latest information, all their frequently asked questions, and then they also have an email address that I've listed there that you can reach out to get additional questions answered. And just out of a courtesy, I just want to let you know that there was an announcement that came out yesterday from DIR explaining their process for compliance, the compliance form at the end of the year. So there is a local government compliance web form that is available on their site currently. It needs to be completed by June 15th. The training still does need to be completed by June 14th. At this time, there will not be any extensions to those deadlines. And elected officials are required to complete this training, even if they do not access a local government computer. That does not include appointed officials. They are exempt. So, and I just wanted to also take note of those local government compliance web forms. They only need to be filled out, and only one web form needs to be sent in to DIR by the school district, by the entity, the local government entity. So, and that can be anyone that the district authorizes. So, with that, I am going to, and if you have any other additional questions related to House Bill 3834, I'm asking you to go and check out that website for the latest information, and then also send an email to that Texas training cert at dir.texas.gov. So I would like to see, I have Julia Sheckrell on the line, and I'd like to see if she has any questions that have come in for us.
Hi, good morning, Melinda. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Wonderful. So we've had quite a bit of questions come in. So to start off with, will a copy of the slide deck and presentation be available after the webinar is over?
Yes, it will. We're going to be posting the recording and slide deck up to the Texas Gateway site, and I can actually go back to that to have that on there.
Perfect. You're going to be.
Yeah, we're also going to be posting it up on the. We're also going to be posting it up on the Texas Education Agency's COVID-19 page, but this is where you'll always find our cybersecurity tools, is at this site.
Okay, great. The next question. Due to security concerns, will TEA ask us to ban Zoom?
No, we will not be asking you to ban Zoom. I think that all the there has been a lot of attention on Zoom, but Zoom is not, they're a professional organization and they have a good product. It's just a matter of the different schools determining whether or not, after they've researched it, whether or not they want to accept those risks that come with it for the benefit that they're being provided. I think all the tools that I mentioned today are viable tools. You just have to use them smartly and configure them in a way that protects your student data.
Okay. The next question. How do you find information for employees that might have had emails and their passwords jeopardized?
Well, I do know that we at TA we use a service called eLock, and that's a paid service where we have our domain checked and we look to see if there's been any findings out on the hackers' websites or the dark web. There is a free service that I'm aware of, and there's other ones as well, so I don't want to particularly endorse any particular one. But there is a site, if you Google, have I been pwned? And I know that doesn't sound very professional, but it's nerdy. So have I been pwned is PWNED. And if you look that up in Google, it is a free service that allows you to check your domain, and it runs a scan for you to let you know if there's any emails with your domain that have been found on any of the breaches.
Okay. Are there any suggestions for virtual board meetings that you have to make the link public? Any advice you want to share?
That's a good question. I do know that there is mention of that, and I didn't look into it in great detail, but there is mention to that in the site, in DIR's website. They do have a document that is called Zoom Issues and Alternatives, and in there they specifically talk about using them in the public, in having public meetings. So I would point you to their site. It's one of the last few documents that they had posted on their website, and they discuss some of the alternatives for that.
Okay. So this is a clarifying question. Does Zoom admin mean Zoom host?
A Zoom admin would be if your organization in your IT department has purchased Zoom as your official meeting platform, and then they assign accounts to people. That would be the admin over the entire account, but then a host would be just someone that sets up an individual meeting, and they have their own sets of settings that they can manage.
Okay.
And while I have you all on the line, I did find that document from DIR, and they have an open meetings hotline. It is 512-478-6736. So if you go out on their website and look up that Zoom and alternative documents, they have some context surrounded that, but they also have that hotline available.
Okay. Is it wise to have young children entering their first and last names? I'm assuming that's when they go into whatever platform they've chosen to use.
I think that should be fine, assuming that you use the platforms for their learning, for their teaching. There is, if you check out the Ferpa and virtual meeting document that I mentioned, there is a slide in there that talks about can you use virtual meetings to share personally identifiable information and Ferpa information? And the answer is yes, assuming that you're using it for the purpose of providing services to the students and providing essentially your business functions that you need to be functioning. So I do recommend that those of you that are interested in that to check out that particular document that I had linked in there for that information.
And can you show where that document is linked? Can you provide that link again? Great. Let's see, we have a couple more that came through. Is Google Meet?
It's this one right here. It's the third one down. That has a lot of great information about how to protect student data and what's legally acceptable for those things.
Okay. Is Google Meets a better way of communicating with students versus Zoom?
Well, I don't want to particularly mention, or promote any tool over another. However, I would do your research on that and see what you're comfortable with. From my personal research, it does appear that like a Microsoft Teams environment, and the Google Meet does seem to have a very robust security in their back end and their processes of how they're doing the meeting. So they're pretty solid solutions.
Do you recommend purchasing Zoom instead of using the free version?
That would probably depend on the usage of your organization. Definitely for the school districts, I would recommend buying the licensed version, and specifically, I would recommend getting the educational version. I believe that they offered it free to school districts, so maybe that's what they're speaking to. But at minimum, I would definitely recommend getting the educational license because they have specific, they have, as you look at the very top link that I have here, they have a privacy policy specifically for those licensed users. And so they're putting a lot of their energy and resources to ensure that they're keeping it FERPA compliant for schools to use.
Okay. So here's another question. The individual is not a Texas teacher. Can they still access Texas Gateway?
Yes, they can. The Texas Gateway is a publicly available site.
Okay. And can you please repeat the hotline number that you mentioned previously?
Yes. That hotline, it's the Office of the Attorney General has an open meetings hotline. It's 512-478-6736. That was 512-478-6736.
Okay, thank you. Does TEA have any concerns or recommendations when students use personal devices during remote learning instead of district-issued technology?
I don't think so. The issue would come more into play actually with your staff using their personal device versus the students, because the students shouldn't be necessarily handling a lot of the, they shouldn't be coming into your school's network, an internal network. So that's where the threat vector would come in, is when using personal devices and connecting into the school district's network. That's where the risk is to potentially infect or harm the school district's data. So using their personal device is fine. I think one of the bigger issues that a lot of schools and parents are going to have is, we're relying a lot on the way that the home network is set up as far as securing what type of sites they get to go to, and all those types of things. But I'm hopeful that the parents are also monitoring that, and if they're not, I guess that's up to the parents. So I not have a concern with that, but maybe with your staff, it would be encouraged for them to be using a device that's provided by the school, just from a standpoint of if their machine is compromised in some way and it's their personal device, you have a lot less control when protecting your network if they're connecting into your network through a VPN or something like that.
Okay. This is a HB 3834 question. Do you recommend that the official cybersecurity coordinator defined by SB 820 is the person to submit to the state, or can it be another employee?
It could be that person, but it could also be another employee. DIR has stated that it just has to be someone that the school district has designated. So I'm assuming it would be the superintendent that would designate who fills out that form.
Okay. Let's do a couple more. Just to confirm, the FERPA approved cloud storage is Microsoft. Are there others?
I do believe there are others. However, I'm not, I haven't fully done the research on all those to know which ones, but I do know that Microsoft is. I know there's discussions of that with, I think it was, what was the other one I was looking at? There's discussions of that with Google Meet as well, but I would again look at the research and just look at the privacy policies of those different platforms, cloud platforms, and check to see if they are FERPA compliant.
Okay. Well, there are several other questions here that I think we should hold on answering till we get our legal team to weigh in, but we can compile all of the questions that you've received here today and the responses and post them on the Texas Gateway under our frequently asked questions and answers section.
Okay, thank you very much, Julia.
Thank you.
Well, I hope you guys are able to navigate this moving forward, and that it's a little bit less confusing. If you do have any questions, you can reach out. I recommend using the cybersecurity at Texas, at tea.texas.gov, just so that way I have a team of folks. I have 2 analysts on our team, and then Julia can also help with that to help make sure that we get an answer to you. So please do use these links and check on them for your resources, and make sure to do your research. But do also know that there's plenty of other threats out there that we could be that we're up against, and I think a lot of these tools I've shown you today, they're not something that as long as we're using them with our best practices and our best configurations, this isn't one of those areas that keeps me up at night, and I hope it doesn't keep you up at night as well. So with that, we will meet and speak with you next time. Thank you.